Facciamo un applauso a Chris Van Goethen perché... Allora, Chris Van Goethen è, a parte un amico, una persona con cui abbiamo lavorato moltissimo con l'Accademia in numerosi progetti a partire dal 2007, credo, almeno noi due, in prima persona. È un docente, è un tecnico di palco ed è uno storico della scenotecnica, una delle figure più importanti che abbiamo in Europa su questa nicchia molto nostra, che è quella delle tecniche di palcoscenico, e ci sembrava una bella opportunità poterlo coinvolgere in questo ciclo di lezioni, perché riesce a darci sicuramente una prospettiva diversa su quella che può essere la ricerca nel nostro ambito, quindi diciamo una prospettiva accademica per dei mestieri che tradizionalmente sono puramente tecnici, se vogliamo, ma che hanno, come dire, una cultura di fondo e un background che è da valorizzare, da comprendere e da ricercare. Quindi Chris sicuramente saprà dare molte indicazioni rispetto a questo, e entrerà anche nello specifico con uno degli innumerevoli progetti che ha condotto nella sua carriera, che è il Canon Project, che è un progetto che ha cercato di sistematizzare le conoscenze che ci sono a livello accademico e a livello invece di pratica quotidiana in ambito di tecniche di spettacolo, ha cercato di sistematizzarlo secondo un metodo che poi lui andrà a spiegarci direttamente. Abbiamo dedicato 2 giornate a Chris, un po' per la rilevanza del protagonista e anche per la quantità di conoscenze che può condividere con noi. Quindi il seminario è oggi e domani mattina, quindi domani mattina alle 10, sì, dalle 10 alle 13. Settimana prossima avremo invece Larry Bush, che è un altro collega con cui collaboriamo in progetti congiunti, anzi in questo momento abbiamo un progetto operativo tra Accademia Scala, la Erasmus Hochschule Ritz di Bruxelles, a cui appartiene Chris, e la UETHG di Vienna, che è l'Accademia di Larry Bush. Ed è un progetto che si chiama Inspire, che sarà il soggetto della lecture che farà Larry Bush settimana prossima, e che affronta invece quelle competenze che vengono oggi richieste ma che ancora non sono sistematizzate nei programmi formativi. Sostenibilità ambientale, sostenibilità delle produzioni, digitale, cioè tutte quelle keywords, quelle parole chiave che sentiamo nominare, che ci sentiamo richiedere anche a livello professionale sempre di più, ma che ancora non hanno una strutturazione organizzata, se non in seminari. In quel quadro noi abbiamo realizzato uno strumento formativo che è gratuito e che è a favore di tutti i professionisti dello spettacolo, cioè quindi sia studenti in corso che professionisti che già fanno questo tipo di lavoro, che è riconosciuto a livello accademico e che vi verrà spiegato in quel contesto. Anche quel progetto, che quindi si concentra sulle competenze, è stato fatto in collaborazione con Chris. Oggi però stiamo sul contenuto, stiamo sulla ricerca tecnico-artistica e stiamo con la testimonianza di Chris Van Goethen, a cui lascio la parola immediatamente. Prego.
Yes. Okay. First of all, if you have questions or something is not clear, just ask me. And be sure your English is way better than my Italian. So we will find a way to understand as we do as theater people. Okay. In very short, I started as a stage manager, a bit by mistake, because I had to do civil service, and I got into theater, and I became stage manager. And then completely by mistake, by something that happened, I became an educator, because somebody wanted me to start an education program, so I think, well, I start an education program. And from that I got into research, which was not expected either. In fact, this whole trip has been an experience of trial and error, trying things out, experiencing, changing. Basically, about the subject we're talking about is research by doing. You start something and you try to figure out how it works. Because often, I was the first one in Belgium making an education program for technical theater. Nobody could tell me how it would work, or how you do that, or how it would fit in a university. So we just started and we figured out on the way doing it. And that's a bit the whole methodology we're going to talk about. I work for the Royal Institute for Theatre, Cinema and Sound. if I'm very honest, I have to tell you that we are royal because we exist 50 years. If you're existing 50 years in Belgium, then you're royal. So not so much effort in that. The research center I'm working for is the Research Center for Open Arts and Futures, where all the people that are working around the arts and the people working around futures. And futures is a methodology in finding out possible futures. It's not predicting the future, but it's looking at what would be possible futures, and based on that, adapting your behavior based on these possible models. And I lead the different approaches. So what we're going to talk about is, first of all, practice-based research in theatre. How does that work? How do we translate that in an educational context, and how do we translate that in an artistic research context? I'll be talking a little bit about the Canon Project 1. I'll do a little bit, which is rather technical, about open link data, but there is some concepts that will occur more and more in the future and that will become more and more important. And then I'll talk a bit about the second Canon project, that is the one that is running now. Good. Let's start with practice-based research. In fact, practice-based research is what we do on a daily basis when we're making theatre. It was for me a very strange thing to discover that was a scientific thing, because I thought that's the way we make theatre. You want to create something. By definition, we create things that are new, because theatre is always something new. And how do we get there? We try things out. And we try them out and they fail. And that's fantastic, because there is nothing that can learn you more than failing. If you understand why it fails, then you can go on. And we just try it, and sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes the director doesn't like it, sometimes we don't like it, sometimes it's unsafe. And then you go back and you start again. And that's a bit the whole idea, is learning by experimenting by doing things. And that's what we do in our daily. In design, it's the same. You make a sketch, and you think it looks nice, and then you start thinking, how does the production fit in that? And then you think that's not going to work. We start the sketch goes into the bin, and we start all over again sketching. But we learn from the first sketch. If we just make a new sketch, not understanding what was wrong with the previous one, then we're not learning. So, if you look into research, there is a difference between practice-based and scientific. In practice-based research, we're going to look at, does it work? We want to make something happening. We want to find a solution to a problem we have. Of course, we base ourselves on all kinds of sources and experiments. And also, and that's quite important, about knowledge and insights from practice. It's what we learned all. If you go into the workshop here, and you would put a USB stick in all the guys' their heads, you would get a huge knowledge base. Because they've learned over the years. And if you can grab all this information, then you get a very rich knowledge base that you can use to create new stuff. We try to do that systematically, but I'll show you later that it's not really working the way we think. And important, of course, is that we describe the process to guarantee the quality. In the way, if you do research, it's not just research for the research, but we also want to create kind of a quality standard. And by definition, what we do is collaborative. In the way, you can't make theatre on your own. You can't do practice-based research on your own. Because you need an environment, you need people that look at it from different directions, and so on. While pure scientific research or academic research is basically to discover if things are true. You have a statement about reality and you're going to try to find out if that's true. That's a different story. That doesn't give you a direct solution to a problem. It does give you a basis, but it doesn't give you a real solution to a concrete problem. So in that sense, it's rather different. The quality is high, because there is a higher reliability and there is a lot of checks and balances to see that your research is good, but it's mostly also within one field of expertise. So you have a chemical engineer, he does chemical research, he will never look outside of his field. Well, maybe the solution for his problem lies in another field, but that's not how it works. I must say this is changing in the sense that more and more I see researchers getting people together from different fields to look at their problem, to look at their subject in different ways. To give you one example, I'm working now with a group of people that a bit came together by accident on the Wanderdekoration from Wagner in Bayreuth. And it was a PhD student that asked me, could you help, because I have two students that try to make a model and they don't understand the mechanics. So we started looking at that. The students are basically architecture students that are model makers. Then we got a musical historian coming in because we needed to know the timing of the movement. We got an expert from the States that is expert in the painting techniques. And then we got somebody from Berlin that is really specialized in the Bruckner painting technique. So you bring people together from all kind of areas. And then you get something way richer. And often you can say, oh, but this is not going to work. While the others wouldn't see that. I did a similar thing in Stockholm in the Rottingholm Theatre. Rottingholm Theatre is a Baroque theatre where they still have real-life performances in 17-something sets. And there was a director and two opera singers. They were trying to figure out how the acoustics work and how you would stage in a theater like that. So they invited my colleague that is specialized in historic lighting. They invited me to look at the mechanics. They invited an acoustical engineer. You had the two singers there. You had some other people around. And we just were trying things out. But what if I stand here? Because the actors say, or the singers say, this is the perfect place to sing. And then my colleague had to say, very nice, could you be on fire? Because that's exactly where the light is, so you would be on fire, so that's impossible. And then we tried another position, and then I had to say, yeah, but that can't work because then you're in the way of the movement. And bit by bit, we got to a solution like, okay, what would be the ideal position to stand there? That's a thing that you could never do on your own, that you could never do within a book. And I think that's more and more where we get to, is the world is too complex to stay within a small field. So I think academic can learn a lot from the practice-based, and we can learn a lot from the academic. So it's not a real conflict. If you have to define that, I try to make kind of a definition that fits in what we do, is it's the art of using creative process to find solutions or answers to specific problems or questions in the field based on existing knowledge and methods. Most of the time we don't invent something new. In the way, if you see the whole history of technical theatre, there is maybe one machine that we invented specifically for the theatre. All the others are things that existed but that we adapted. We had cranes and we adapted them, we hung a god on them and then the god could define. We didn't invent this crane. That was already there. And so you can basically trace back every theatre technology technique to other techniques that were used earlier. So in that sense, it's always also understanding the wider world to get further. Now the fact it's creative also makes that it's personal by definition. Especially in theatre, we can find solutions, but it will only fit one specific case in one specific theme for one specific production. We can translate them later on for something else, but the basic idea is that you make it for a complete. If you have a different theme, you will get different results. And often this research is based on passion. In the way when you see people that are working that way are most of the time really passionate about their subject. They really want to find solutions. They really want to find it, want to make it better. They really want to make the perfect production. And every time at the end of the production, you think, we can do better. And you start over. The process is very intuitive. We try to make it give a methodology, but often not complete. In the sense, yes, there is techniques like scaling up, where you first make something in a small model, then you make it bigger, you see if it works, and then you make it in full size. But that's not always working. The core is that we do it by doing, that we really try stuff out. And often that means that we know more or less where we go, and you get this approximate method. You know a bit where it's like walking through a city without exactly knowing. You go a bit too much to the left, and then you go back a bit to the right, and bit by bit you get to the right solution. So that's a bit how this process works. I'm a big fan of guys like Da Vinci and so on. Why? Because they have a lot of different traits. In the way Da Vinci made theater sets, he made theater machines, he made paintings, he was a spy, he was a politician, he was a lot of different things. But he used the knowledge of all these different things to do different things. In the way you see influence from one part in the other the whole. And there is several people like that are, especially in the Renaissance period, that are really have this thing like combining all kind of knowledge from different fields. And that helps a lot in what we do. And that also makes that you have to try to know a little bit of everything. In the way it's fantastic to know a little bit about electricity, a little bit about theater, a little bit about mechanics, a little bit about flying people, a little bit, all these different, if you have a basic knowledge of it and you need a concrete solution, at that point you really can go and say, okay, now I have to go deeper in this. But if you don't know it exists, you can't go deeper. Good. The fact that it's collaborative gives you different points of view. And it helps if you have people from different cultures, from different fields, from different practices. That strengthens the result. We'll see that in the Canon project, for example, where we work with people from Spain, from Italy, Belgium, Germany, UK, Sweden. The fact that you work with people from different regions also means that you have different visions on history. I was talking at one point about the Second World War with a Finnish guy, and he was very surprised we were talking about Germans. Because for him, in the Finnish perception, it is about the Russians. Because they've never seen a German there. It was mainly about the Russians. And that gives you a complete different view on this war. And that's basically with everything. It's because these different cultures have a different view on what we are doing. You get a way broader perspective on this history. Good. Anyway, it's multidisciplinary. I think that's more or less clear. If you make a set, you have to take also in account the lighting, you have to take in account the actors, you have to take in account the direction, and so on. So based on that, you need all this collaboration to really make a good set or a good design. And we love to do experiments. It's for my students like a lot of experiments where there is fire and explosions, of course. But we often do experiments where we build in small the things in 3D in real life. Why? We can do all that digitally, but that doesn't give you the same feel. You can't look so easily around. You can't. It gives you a better view on the things you're researching, and it triggers new ideas. And that can go with lighting, as we often do lighting. I'm a fan of Barbies, by the way. Why? Barbies are more or less scale 1 to 4. And that's a good scale to experiment. So often we do lighting with a Barbie on a table and 2 flashlights. That gives you an idea on how it could look, and based on that you go further and develop ideas. If you want to test colors, you put them the right costume, and then you can play around with the light. So working on scale, trying things out, often very rough with a lot of tape around it, it works. And often and that's also a practice we have in theater, we will upscale. First you make a drawing of something, then you make kind of a model of it, and then finally you put it on stage. And in every step, you're gonna see, is there things that we need to correct, things that have to be better, and based on that you kind of grow on. And of course we use sources, only our sources are often different from traditional research. A nice example is why we use playtext as a source, because that's what we are working on. But we often work with mood boards, where we say, okay, this is not what I want, but it has the feel of what I want. And this is not what I want either, but this gives you the right color. And bit by bit, you start to puzzle things together, and you start to say, oh, but this and this, if we would fit that together, we would kind of create this. A typical thing also in costume is you have a color scheme of the set, you have the color scheme that you have in mind, you're gonna try to mix that and see if it all fits, and then the lighting guy comes in and looks at, okay, can it work like that? And bit by bit, that grows together. On the other hand, we have a lot of technical information about material and stuff like that. Probably we have some documentation of previous experiments we did for other productions, and we all bring that together and we create. And of course, the core thing is what's in people's head, in the sense that what people know by practice but is never written down. So that's why it's so important to have a good relationship with all the people in the workshop, if you have or in other workshops, that you can have, if you have a problem and you know, but this guy did something like that before, you can have a chat with them, and based on that you can work further. Good. We often have drawing as a method in the way we use drawing to express ourselves. And in Belgium, well, Belgium is the land of beer, of course. This means we have a lot of beer naps. And often, first set designs, first technical drawings are made on a beer nap. You're discussing with your colleagues afterwards, the beer naps are there, you make a small sketch, and you make the sketch while you're discussing things, and then the other will take over and will say, no, this is not working, you should do it like that. And that's the first thing, it's visualizing our ideas. Theater people are very visual people. Because we can say more with one drawing than with 10 pages of text. And that's a good way in discussing, because it helps understand, especially if you're in a multilingual environment, it helps a lot to draw your ideas, because that's kind of a universal language we all share. Good. This is a part that we did during COVID. COVID was a little bit annoying because we couldn't sit together in a cafe. So we had to find an alternative for our beer naps. And we found this nice software where we can basically do the same thing. It's a combination between scribbling and a mood board. And the nice thing is you can zoom in, you can zoom in, you can zoom in. So one of these, can I show this? Like one of these things, you can zoom in that you have a full text that you can read, for example. But it helps you to structure your ideas, to make relationships, and so on. And we use this method a lot also in historic research. And the reason is we don't see history as a list of dates and a list of names of people. We have computers for that. We don't need to learn that anymore. We see history really as a set of relationships between things that happen, and things that influence each other. And then you get kind of a very complex thing, which is, I always say, it's kind of a 3D Excel sheet. So you have an Excel sheet with 2 dimensions, you make a third dimension to it, and then you can try to grab history. So we often try to do this because then you can relate information to other parts of relation, and you see on the spot if it works or not. The idea is a bit, if you can't get it on an A4 paper, probably it's too complex and you should split it out. That's a bit the idea behind. Good. More and more, drawing becomes also a method in all kinds of research. I put some examples together. The top one is the first theater in Antwerp that doesn't exist anymore. It's taken down in the 1600s. There were no plans. There was basically there was a plan of the building, but not of the theater. So, and it's a guy, Timothy de Pape, he specialized in these things. He makes great drawing. He starts with, okay, what do I know? I know that, well, the theater was in that part of the building. There are still walls there, there is pillars there, so it has to have more or less this size. And then he starts to read theater texts. And then he starts to write people that talk about the play. And in all these bits and pieces, he finds elements to say, oh, but if it is like that, then there was a stage. Because people talk about the stage and the actors were on stage, so there must be a stage. And there were so many people, so we have to know the space has to be more or less that big. And then you start reading plays and it says you come up from that side. It means there has to be a door there. So bit by bit he puzzles this together. He puts it in a drawing, and every time again he questions his drawing with new information. And that's a bit the way of work. And that gives you quite accurate results where you can say, okay, this is as close to the reality as we can get. And probably in 5 years' time they find something new, and maybe they have to adapt. But that's a method that works pretty well. And the results are so nice that they're almost pictures. If they would have been able in that time to take pictures, probably the picture would have looked like that. Good. In history, we visualize time often in a timeline. And if you work together with a lot of people, you have a lot of facts and a lot of things that have to be in the timeline. So we kind of created a quite big timeline, because there was only one place in the school where we could hang it on the wall, which was in the hall. So we worked in the hall. And the idea was basically that everybody would bring new facts, new ideas on, and put them on the timeline, and then after a while you would kind of start to reorganize them in a bit more structure. But it's kind of a box to get all these collective ideas together in one spot. And sometimes you have to do crazy things. This truck is the result of frustrations and craziness. We were touring with the production about art and kitsch, and the idea was you arrive in the school, you have a lot of art and all kind of kitschy objects, and you fill the sports hall with this kitsch, with trusses around that and lighting on that, and then the play is in the middle and the audience is sitting around. Nice idea, because they said, oh, it's not a problem, you arrive in the school with a truck, you put the truck in front of the sports hall, and you unload this, and an hour later we can play. The first school we arrived, the sports hall was at the 4th floor. We arrived at 8 o'clock, and there was 150 mothers parked in front of the school trying to get their kids in the school, so the truck couldn't enter. The sports hall was on the 4th floor, there was no elevator. And the rest of the tour kind of went like that. So you start to feel there is a bit of frustration. And at the end we had kind of a briefing, and they came with a fantastic idea, we're going to do a new tour like that. And at one point I said, well, you know what? Instead of bringing all this stuff into the school, why don't we put the kids in the truck? In fact, as a joke, but in a strange way, they started discussing this. And 2 hours later, we had a concept that we would make a production that fitted in the truck and where the kids could sit in the truck. And that production toured for 3 years. So, and that's all based on a crazy idea. Is in most cases, you would stop yourself because you think already in advance it's impossible. But if you give yourself and the other people the freedom to have crazy ideas, then sometimes you get to fantastic solutions. If you stick to everything that we are sure that is possible, we will never be innovative. So sometimes you have to get this freedom, and you have to have the openness to discuss with other people this crazy idea from the perspective that maybe it's possible, not that it's not possible. So, and that's also part of this way of researching, is that you try things out, and you know probably that will fail, but it's worth exploring it. So in that sense, getting rid of all the boundaries that you get in advance, because of course a lot of people will say your idea is impossible, it's too complicated, it's never done before. That's a typical answer, it's never done before. And I think if you say it's never done before and we're able to do it, then we're going to get a very innovative idea. So that's a whole different perspective. And I think if you create this openness, and of course you can't do that when you are a day ahead of your opening night. You have to find moments where that is possible. But creating this openness in trying to do something else helps a lot in getting really new, innovative ideas. One of the issues with this type of research is that what we learned is mainly in the heads of people. It's very hard to put down on paper what we learn. So you have to try to transmit that to other people so it becomes kind of common knowledge. But that's not an easy thing. And on top of that, the results are not reusable in the way they are. My cellar is full of stuff where we experimented with special effects and so on. Some of it worked, some of it didn't. But it's not like I can take it and put it in another production. I can take it and try to make something new for a new production. There it makes sense. But just a copying, that doesn't work. Even a smoke machine, which is kind of standard equipment, you always have to adapt the way you use it to make it usable in a performance. It's not like, we don't have standard solutions. So, being open to other people about ideas, exploring the others' ideas helps a lot in getting lost. So, now the question is, how do we translate that into an educational context? Because of course, in education you want something structured and organized, and there has to be timings and whatever. So we try to make this, when they said at one point they said, yes, but in education you need to have research, which was not when we started the program, and we started thinking, but we're doing research, because we make all these productions together, so we do kind of research. How can we translate that into a bit formalized way? And in very short, we decided that in the first year, you prepare kind of a research. In the second year, you develop a proof of concept. And in the third year, we're going to use the result of the research and we're going to put that into a production. The big advantage we have an actors department, a directors department, and a technical department, and a production department, and they all work together on production. So it's possible to create an idea and then drop that into production. So in the first year, you kind of, you have a question and you start reading about it, and then you gather information, and based on that, in the second year, you will find solutions, you will develop them, and then you make them in a way that we can see that it will work. And when you know that it works, then you're going to implement it and finalize it in this production at the end, and you're going to report. So that's a very nice logical line to think and to do research. It fits perfectly in an education program, and the reality is a little bit more complex. Because you start working and you have a question, and then you think there's something wrong with the question, so you have to go back and read a little bit, and then you find new information, and then probably you have to go back to your question, and then you're checking something, and then you realize that it doesn't work, so you have to go back. So this methodology works as kind of a tool, but it's not the goal. It's probably you fail, and you have to go back, and then, or you have a new idea, or you read something new. So in reality, this is kind of chaos. And then all my academic colleagues said that's not possible, because we have rules on how research should work, and so on. At one point, I found quite a nice text of a guy, it's part of a performance. The play is about a young researcher that works somewhere in the middle of nowhere in Africa, and he's researching ants. And basically what he says is, well, when I was a student, they all said it's logic and it's structured and it all gets in the right order, because that's what you see in the result. But then afterwards you realize that in fact it's chaos, and it's chaos during the whole process, and it's only at the end you give it kind of a nice structure to make it understandable. And I think that's quite important to know that, okay, yes, this perfect pathway from question to result, you can put that on paper at the end, but that there is chaos during the process is a normal thing. And it shouldn't stress you off. Good. So that's the way we put that into our education program. And the next step was that we translated that to our research, and I have to say we do practice-based research in the arts. So it's not about the arts, it's not theoretical research, it's really in the arts. And the way we, our research method is basically making productions, making technology, whatever. It's not looking at technology or productions and describing it. That's an important thing to know, which is a big fight between the academic world and the artistic world, is that we say, no, we want to do research based on what we are doing. And often that is also, especially for the actors and the directors, that is research where they make a performance, and the performance is the result of their research. And then they describe kind of how they got there. That's a different way than the theoretical research. Now I brought you two examples, and it's two research projects I did with a colleague in Sweden, with Anders Larsson. And the first one is changement à vue. I'm not sure what the Italian word is for. It's basically the Baroque method of sets that go in and out, and you change in one spot, you change a forest into a house.
Cambia vista.
Yeah, good. And based on that, that was a bit the title, but then we started to think about what is the language of something that moves on stage. There's something strange that we did create over the years, kind of a language about lighting and what it means. What warm light means, what cold light means, what backlight means, why we use side light for certain productions and so on. But also what the meaning is for the audience and how we can trigger that. I can give you an example. If you wake up in the morning and your curtains are closed, you still are aware of the weather outside. You are aware that it's going to be a nice sunny day, or that it's going to be a grey, misty day. Now, how do you know that? Because you can't see outside. Maybe a little bit of light coming in, but that's not it. Basically, we have a very good understanding of weather. And unconsciously, we understand that, okay, if I have warm light, probably the weather will be nicer. But also, if the shadows are sharp, probably there is no clouds and there will be a sun, because then you get sharp. While if it's gray outside, you get kind of a fuzzy light and you won't have any shadows, and the color of the light will be probably more gray. So nobody consciously thinks about that. In the way you wake up in the morning, you're not thinking, oh, there is shadows, so probably the weather will be nice. It's kind of an unconscious thing that we realize. And that's a bit what that's the first part. And the second part is how can we express ourselves about life. We've been quite good in the last 50 years in describing that and creating a language where we understand each other if we talk about it. The strange thing is for motion, for things that move on stage, we never had a language. Now these languages are often based on perception. And well, I'll give you an example. If I do like this, everybody knows what type of movement that is. It's quite strange because most of you have never seen a train with this kind of motion, because that's from the steam era. But in a strange way, in our youth, everybody says this is a train, and we believe that. And when I see a movement like that, it will get back, and I will get back in a certain time frame, in a certain. You need some oil. And that type of thing we never create, which means that often motion on stage was not deliberately made in a specific way. While on the other hand, is what is the difference between a crane machinist on a building site and a stage technician that does the flybars? Technically, they do exactly the same thing. They move stuff from place A to place B. The main difference is not that they move it, but how they move it. If they move that in a straight line, or if they move that in kind of a nice curve, or whatever, that's what gives meaning to it. One of the things is that in nature, nothing is linear. There is no bird that flies in a linear, there's one exception, if you shoot them, they come down in a straight line, more or less. But a bird will never kind of fly in a straight line. It will have a certain curve, a certain movement, difference in speed, and so on. So this research was basically on how can we tell a story with motions. And it can be a very linear thing, in the way if you want to see something very mechanical, we will just make something like that. It also has to do with things that don't feel very natural. If you have a tree on stage in the middle, and you would fly that in the flybars, inside, that would be very unnatural. Because that's a bit against everything we think, is that trees would go, while if I have clouds that go in the sky, that's a very normal thing. Houses that come from the side, that is quite normal. But a house that would fly, except if it's really needed in the production and it has a meaning, is not a natural thing. So it's about consciously thinking about motion on stage. That was basically the idea of this production. Good. So, how do we describe that, and how do we create storytelling with machines? Now, how did we research that? We started to build a 1-to-4 model. So why we have discussed long what size the model had to be, and 1-to-4 is rather big. But the reason why it is small enough to experiment with, to work on your own, because I can reach the top of the theater, and I can reach the floor, and I can see things that I can't see in a real theater even, because you have an overview of the whole stage with the upper stage and the understage together. It's quite easy to work alone, it's quite easy to build and adapt equipment. There is not so much safety issues because everything is on scale, and it's quite easy to move. On the other hand, it had to be big enough to feel friction, for example. If I have a model on a scale 1 to 10, I can move a whole set with one finger. It doesn't tell me anything about how does it really work. So that was, in fact, the first discussion was to find out, okay, what has to be the scale, how does it have to work, and then we developed this whole model. And in fact, it's not an exact model of a theater. It's more like a box that we can use to research, kind of a toy type of thing, where we can put different techniques in. And, well, we can't damage anything, because that would be a bit problematic. It's kind of a toolbox where we can try out a lot of different stuff. The idea was that we have an empty space, we have a grid, we would have a chimney for counterweights, we have all kind of tools like drums and so on, and then you have all these little tools that you can put in the box, and then you can experiment in a quite fast way. And the first version of that, which is made by a student of mine, looked more or less like that. Little drums, a floor where we could put drums on and ropes and stuff like that, and then we could play around. Based on an existing steel construction, we had that kind of a mechanical type of thing in the large. The machines we built were based on books about the matter and about books about the burla machinery, which is one of the few theaters that still has this type of machinery. The problem was that every time we built something was for one specific technique, and at the end we wanted to get more stuff together. And then we developed this model, which is a bit bigger. It's a scale 1 to 4, but it's kind of huge. But we made it in a way that we can transport it. It comes all apart. We can put it in boxes, we can put it in a truck, and we can drive it over to wherever we want, which we also did, because we used it not only for our research, but we also went to trade fairs, for example, to show people the research. And in fact, that's way nicer than writing about it. And traditionally, you will write about research, but what we did is we took all our experiments together, go to a trade fair with all people that probably would never read a text would pass by, and we showed them what we were doing, and we got a lot of feedback. Now, one of the reasons we do research in this matter, even if it's historical research, is not for the sake of history. It's not of just describing history, but it's trying to understand how it worked. One of the groups of people that were the most enthusiastic about what we did were people building new equipment, were technicians that were on a daily basis on the floor. Because they got new ideas by looking into history. If we would do history only for the sake of history, probably we wouldn't need to do all these experiments. It's because we want to understand how it works, how people thought about it, how it was perceived, what were the issues, and so on, and that's the thing you can't get into a book. But if you use that for learning and then develop new stuff, and in some cases that is really, there is theaters that are built that have some ideas that we developed here, and the guy that is a manufacturer came by and he understood this, and he took these ideas and adapted that into the theater. Now, in reality, it looks more or less like that. So it's about 7 meters wide, it's 4.5 high, and it's 3 meters deep, and you can walk on the floor. One of the nice things is that even if you go to a real theater, you will never be able to see this whole thing. Why? Because the two understages, well, they're under the ground, you will never see them. The whole upper stage you would never see in a theater, because you only see the frame. So even just to understand how it works, a model like that is fantastic, because you can see, if I push that in the understage, that's what's happening on stage, and that's what's happening above. Good. And we got kind of, strangely enough, that's called an Italian grid. Yeah, it's still used in the most other countries in Europe. They say, oh, you're not allowed to use this anymore, and here it works, and it works perfectly fine. So based on that, we built this whole tool, and we did all kind of research in there. And the nice thing was also we had this kind of science day, and people with their kids come in, and they were the most enthusiastic people playing around with it. And it helps because it can show you very complex techniques in a very simple way. And I think that helps a lot. One of my favorite things is Quali. It's basically you look at the stage and there is clouds coming out of the ceiling, and then there is gods standing there. And I think I have a small video of that. Let me see if I can show that. You see the Barbie again. You see the clouds coming out, and then the Barbie should fly in now. So the gods are here, and then they disappear again, and the clouds go out again. Yeah, and Barbie is kind of swinging them. If you look at the drawing only, you think, oh yes, this is simple. Until you start making it, and then you start to see what the real issues are. The fact that she's swinging is quite an important thing, because in a drawing you think they go from A to B, but they go from A to B and then back to A to B. And it's way more complex. So by trying this out, you get a way better understanding of how the technology works, and what the variations could be, and what the problems are. And if one rope is not perfectly right, what would happen, and everything would block. And then you really start to understand how it works. And by building the model, it's also quite easy to explain to other people. I have a second one, and that's quite a nice thing. If you look at this drawing, you think, oh yes, it's an actor hanging somewhere, and he comes in a bow and he goes back. That was what most people thought. Yeah, it's, instead of a straight line, it's kind of in a bow. Until you start making this. And then you realize, I'll show you. So you have to see, that's the actor. Now look what happens. By the system, the actor is hanging head down, is kind of diving onto the stage, is horizontal when he's in the middle, and then he goes up, head up. That's a thing you hardly can see in this drawing. The whole technique is done like, in fact, it's a method for angels to bring love letters. So they come down, they dive in onto the stage. When they're horizontal, they can give the love letter to one of the actors, and then they fly with their head up. That's the thing you don't see on in this drawing. It's only when you start making it that you start realizing how this works. So there again, this type of research helps you in way deeper understanding how things function. I think that's quite core of what you have. Now what the research is, okay, how does it work? We also looked into the ergonomics. That's a bit a side thing that happened. We never had that in our proposal, like, oh, we're going to look into the ergonomics. But at one point, a guy said to me, yes, but all this machinery was very, very bad for the technicians. It was very bad for their backs and so on. They all would get ill. And because we had been working on it, we started researching that, and we figured out that these methods that were used were way better for your physical health than the modern systems we had. Just as everybody said, yeah, but it's very shaky and it doesn't work properly and so on, and we figured out, no, you can synchronize everything. In fact, you could synchronize a full stage and do all the movements on the stage at the same point, just by one guy leaving a room. So it's often also helpful to test out what people say about a technology or a way of working, and based on that you can say, yes, it's going to work, no, it's not going to work, or what you said is not true, because we can prove now that it worked differently. Good. So we have a short break now. Is that a good idea? Let me go on for 5 more minutes. And we make the break nice and good. The second project I wanted to talk about is also with this same group of people, and there we looked into the history of life. And also we looked at a lot of text, we looked at a lot of things that are said about theater. And one of the things we did is we went to the butchers and we bought fat, and we kind of boiled that fat, and then you get kind of clean fat, and we made candles out of it. Now in almost every text you read about theaters with candlelight, it says, oh, it smells. It's terrible. The smell in the theater is terrible. Well, we had a dinner with these candles and it worked quite fine. So that's a bit odd, because everybody says it's a huge smell and it's terrible and so on. And now we test it and it's not like that. And then you can say, oh, it's nice, it's not like that. Or you can say, we're going to try to figure out what the difference is. Did we do something wrong when we made candles? And we looked at a lot of text, we looked into historical candles and so on, and we basically figured out that we made our candles too good. Because we really purified the fat, which probably in the Middle Ages would be done not that properly. So there would be a lot of leftovers from meat in grease, and that would probably kind of give a not so nice smell in the theater. And the second thing is the core thing of a candle is in fact the wick. Because we always think that the candle is burning, but that's not true. In fact, what is burning is you have a small flame. The flame will melt not only the candle, but would also make it in a vapor, and it's the vapor that burns. Now, if your wick is good, and the relation with this vapor is exactly on the right spot, and you will have a perfect burn. If your wick is not good, you would get not enough burning, and then you start to get smell. It's a bit like if you take a candle in your house, you don't smell anything until you put it out, and then you get the smell. So probably, first of all, their fat would not be that good, and secondly, probably their wicks were not that good. And that would give this, and of course, if you have 250 candles in a theater, and there is a little bit of smell of every theater, then you get a lot of smell. We're going to experiment more about that in the summer, because there is, next to Drottningholm, where we're not allowed to work with fire, there is another theater which is called Competenze, and there we're allowed to work with candles. So we're going to make performances with only candlelight. Yeah. Which is, I must say, rather exciting to do. Because that's full scale with actors and everything on it. So that's going to be pretty nice. Good. We also looked into wax candles, all kinds of things. We also noticed that there was a lot of misunderstanding because we all talk about oil lamps. That's why you still sometimes see in people's houses an oil lamp, nice. Well, in reality, that's not an oil lamp. It's a petrol lamp. And a real oil lamp works in a complete different way. So all this type of misunderstandings, you only figure them out when you really start testing stuff. One of the nice things is we worked with, we got to the strange thing that in the UK they still call their footlights, they call them floats. And that's a rather odd name, because it's floating. And then at one point we saw in a church a light like that, and it's the only light in a church that will burn 24 hours a day, which is basically impossible with natural oil. In the way, if you have natural oil, the oil can only go like a centimeter in a wick, not more than that. So if your oil is going lower, it wouldn't feed the flame anymore. So, and then we started looking how that worked, and basically it's a little bit of cork with a wick through it that floats on the oil. And if the oil goes lower, 2 weeks ago with it also. So we tried that type of stuff out with some complexity, because it's a little bit more complex than what I've done now, but we figured out how things work. While often in one of the things also is that a lot of stuff in technology you find in between the lines of other texts. A lot of people that write about theaters with candlelight, but hardly anybody really writes about how do these candles work. It's always in the sideline, and you find 2 lines here, and you find a line there, and you find a problem they had somewhere else there. And if you puzzle all that together, then you start to understand the reality. But it's never in the core of what we are doing. Good. And then, of course, after that, we started experimenting with gaslight, which is rather exciting and extremely dangerous. I'll show you later a curve of the fires in theater, and you see kind of a nice constant line of how many theaters burn down in a year. And then you see an enormous peak and going back down, and the peak starts where we start using gaslight, and it ends where we stop using gaslight and start using electricity. Is there any dancers here in the hall? No?
Dancers.
Good, then I can tell this story. No.
Yeah.
Okay. In researching the gaslight, I found one extremely terrible story about ballerinas. And the way that if I understand well, she wants to fix something in her shoe. She goes with her tutu over a glass flame, gets on fire. All the other dancers are very solid there, and they come and help her with their other tutus, and they all get on fire. And the public thinks it's a fantastic show. Because they have no clue that it's not real. And I thought, oh, this is an exception. But then bit by bit, when we got deeper into this gaslight, we figured out that happens on a quite regular basis. So it was kind of an awful part of this lighting history on the side. What was even more shocking for me is some of them died. There's one prima ballerina that comes back after 6 or 8 months. She's kind of recovered. And well, there is a story that the hard parts of her corset were literally burned into. So the manager is very happy, and he says, well, we have now a new type of thing that can't burn to make and she feels it and said, no, this is too stiff. I'm not dancing with that. Everything fully out. Give me the old one again. Which also tells something about our mentality in how we look into it. So, bit of a side, but it's also, that tells you the reality. Because in the technical history, it would just tell you what type of walls it has. In the theater history, it will tell you, yeah, the gas was terrible, because it also eats all the oxygen in a theater. And that means that it was not very nice to sit in a theater at that point. On the other hand, it helped us a lot with COVID. Because the theaters that had this gaslighting, and they needed to have more oxygen. And often you see, if you look at the outside, and you see a theater where on top of the public part, there's kind of a little house on top of the roof. That's mostly theaters that used to have gaslight because they had kind of a chimney to get the bad air out of the theater. And we figured out that all the theaters that were built in that way, we could put way more audience in there during COVID time because we had a kind of a natural air conditioning. So that's another side effect into the history. The third thing we did in this project was also we looked at early electrical light, which is not like spotlights and so like we have now, but the first light bulbs and the first type of colored light. And to find the light bulbs was a bit of an issue because the color temperature of the first light was way lower than what we have now in light bulbs, if we still have light bulbs. But finally we find this little scale 1 to 4 light bulbs that are basically the light bulbs you use in an oven or in a fan on top of your fire. And they're heat resisting, and they have more or less the exact color. And we found a manufacturer that still has the paint to dip the slides in to give you the right color. The whole idea was based on a theater where we found back the original bit when they were building the theater in 1912 on how the electrical installation looked like. So we rebuilt that on scale in the same mechanical model. So we have lighting and the mechanics at the same time. It's a bit a strange story because they built this theater. It was ready in 1914, and it's in the city called Kortrijk, which is in the middle of farmers' fields. So finally, the theater opened only 8 years later, after the First World War, because it was half destroyed and so on. But luckily, we got all the documentation still. So, and that gives you a whole new idea about how lighting looks like. Because you think, oh yeah, there is light there, but it's kind of a shadowless light where the shadows are painted. So you have the light, which gives no shadows, so you paint the shadows, in fact, on the sets. And that gives you kind of a new idea. So from a technical point of view, we wanted to know how does it look like, how much light does this give. It also tells something about the perception of people. In the sense, we think if we have a candle on our table, that hardly gives any light. But for people that are living with candlelight, that if they want light, they need to use candles. That would be a very bright light source. There is even a story in the States that did a research about farmers using candles, that an average farmer would use 1 to 2 candles a year. Because, well, when it was dark, you went to sleep, and when it was light, you woke up. And you would only need a candle if there was something wrong with an animal at night, but you wouldn't use that for anything else because they were way too expensive. So that gives you a whole different perspective, and you can see that over the years, is with every new technology, we kind of double the amount of light we have. So we're not able anymore to see with a little bit of light of one candle, while in a performance that will be in a performance in that time, that will be bright light. And then there is other issues. That's the Globe Theatre in London, so the historical Globe Theatre. They build a second theatre now next door, which is an indoor theatre from the same period, lit with candles. And they have an extremely good research center that works on all these historical techniques. And one of the things that was the most difficult thing was to kill someone with candlelight. In the sense that for the audience at that time, candlelight was just light. For us now, candlelight is something romantic. It's something when you invite somebody where you want to get further with, you put candles around and so on. So for us, candles is kind of a romantic thing. Which makes, if you make a performance with candlelight and you kill someone, it's very hard to get into the right atmosphere. Like, I'm going to kill someone. Another thing is that you can't get focused because the light is getting it everywhere. And then they discovered that actors would often light each other. So you have general lighting, but then the actor would have a candle. And if the other would speak, he would move the candle slightly to the other so to get the other actor focused. And it's that type of details often that you can only find by trying it out. Is that they tried for months with all kind of stuff with candles in a performance environment to get all these things straight, and then you learn from that, and then you spread news. But it's basically practice-based research. From an artistic point of view, how people adapt to this, and then do we adapt our view on what light is and what light should be if there is new technologies. That was a third one. And there is a quite interesting thing. Do you know Bram Stoker? Yes, Bram Stoker is?
The author of Dracula.
Yes, but he was also the manager of Irving, one of the people that did all the big changes in theater. And he wrote some text about going over from candle to gas and from gas to electrical light. And one of the things that was really where everybody was very angry about was that if you go to electrical light and you dim electrical light, the color changes. There was a big row. Yes, we have gaslight and that always has the same type of color, and now you come with this new thing and it changes color. Okay, that was in that time. And now we go to the switch from electrical light to LED. What is the big complaint now? Well, if we dim it, it doesn't change color. So there's also things that we keep to what we are used to. And at one point we're going to use that for artistic reasons. Because often dimming light was used to create another color temperature, which gave another effect, which tells a different story. And now suddenly we lose the tool. While in the beginning, because they did have the tool, it was an annoyance, then we do something useful with it, and then afterwards we kind of lose it. So, and that type of perceptions is what we looked at. A last thing that was in there is we looked a lot in the whole changeover to LED. And of course LED was, yes, why do we have LED? Because it's way more energy efficient. We figured out that because we can, we made bigger and bigger and bigger light sources. And now we use the same amount of energy with LED as we used before with traditional light. But that's a long story on its own. Good. I think now is a good moment to take. And you earned a break. So, we talked a little bit about how we dealt with this different types of research with a focus on history. And then we get to the first real European project. In the sense we worked together with people from all over Europe. But this was the first time that we really brought a whole group of people together in one project to look into this history of technology. And people came from Spain, from Resat, Barcelona, as well Instituto del Teatro and the Polytechnic, which is the architecture school. We had a school from Frosinone. In Italy, we had the Czech Theatre Institute, which is the archive, the theatre archive. These are also the people that have a website with all historical theatres in Europe together. We had the school from Berlin. We had Rose Bruford College from the UK. And we had the school in Stockholm, which is a combination of schools, 9 schools together, but from different fields. So there is scenography like Resat, there is a technical theatre like Sweden and the UK and Belgium. There is more technology based from Germany, and there is architecture. And by bringing these students together, it meant that we got influences from different points of view, as well in geographical position, because they come from other countries, but also from different fields, because different fields look in a different way to this history. In total, we worked with 20 colleagues and over 70 students that participated. What the whole idea was that technical theatre is undervalued, and the reason for that is if a technician does a good job, nobody sees it. You're not getting in the newspapers as a technician when everything goes well. You do get into the newspapers if everything goes wrong. If something really dramatically falls down, if something goes on fire, then you get as a technician in. That means that people don't know what's happening there. People don't know how we make the magic. Because, in fact, the best comment you can get from an audience is, was there lighting? I didn't know that. Was there costumes? I didn't know that. Was there sets? I didn't know that. Because then it means that you did a good job. You created an environment where the actors or the singers can do their thing. So that makes it a little bit frustrating, but it also means that often we lose information because it is not seen as important. I see in a lot of archives, for example, if it's technical, they throw it out. You know, we keep information about big singers, big dancers, big actors. We keep information about the writer of the play, the director, the musicians, but everything which is backstage, that's out of scope. So we try to change that a bit, and we try to make people aware of what we are doing, and also understand the importance of keeping this history, and we try to do that from multiple perspectives. Now, if we talk about technical heritage in the first place, we talk about, well, there is some conflicts in that, because we're talking about the equipment and the technology that is used in performances, and including the documentation about the equipment, about the buildings, about the people, the organization, the terminology, this whole world of theatre technology, everything which shaped our world basically, and our work, is everything we work with. The idea is that you should be able to re-understand how we worked in a certain period. One of the problems is this very recent history. In most cases we talk about history when it's 100 years old. Now if you look at this machine, which is a Revox recorder, we're talking about something that was standard technology 25 years ago. To give you an idea, one of my students said, "Excuse me, sir, is the picture not upside down because the wheels are on top?" So they had no idea what the machine was, while it was, in very recent times, it was still used. And it has shaped not only our work in that time, but it has also shaped how we do now music editing, for example. That's based on what happened with these machines. So that makes it a bit difficult, and that's also sometimes difficult to explain to people that you have to safeguard it now, and you shouldn't wait 100 years, because then it's probably too late. Now what we did in this project, we brought all these students together, and we created kind of a space where we could do collaborative research. And we did that as well on-site as online, so we came, or the idea was at least that we would come together every 6 months with the students and work a week together on a subject, and then in between they would work online in going more in detail, and they would research in the different places and so on. The idea was that we had students' workshops where they worked all together, and then we also had teacher workshops where the teachers all came together in exchanging ideas on how can you teach history, what would be another way of doing that, and so on. And of course, the project also wanted to create output. And that's an important thing in European projects, is on one hand the collaboration, the fact that you bring people together from different countries, but also that you create something that lasts for the future. That's a bit the idea. And the good thing in European projects is everything is open source. Because when we create something in this project, it also means that it's free to use for everyone. So some of the results, I get to that a bit later, are there, and you can all use them. And I think that's a very nice thing, because at the end, yes, they pay, but they also get a lot in return. So we worked a lot more online than we expected, because the moment the project started, we had this little virus that kind of stopped us from coming together. So we changed over the whole project for a while in everything online. Which, if I'm honest, was pretty hard. Not so much for the teachers, because for the teachers we all knew each other already from before. But for the students, working online with people that you have never seen before, that you have not talked to, that you not have had a coffee or a beer with or whatever, that's hard because it's a bit abstract looking at a screen to people that you don't know. But it worked out. They did fantastic things. They worked together. They created mind maps. They created all kinds of ideas on how we could go on. And then finally we could work together. So we worked a lot on learning to know each other in the beginning. Because if you want to work together with people, you really need to understand, okay, this is the type of person I have to approach in this way, and to be a little bit careful about that. And if you know a little bit of background of people, that helps a lot. So we did this kind of things where we created a map on the floor, and then they would all be standing in the right country, and then you could ask questions, and then they made little cards that like you sent on holiday to each other, telling about one subject they're really interested in. And that got around, so we did that type of activities. We also visited a lot of different places, so we went for a week to a city, and then we visited different things, we discussed things, we worked together, we created content, and we created a plan for the next 6 months. That was a bit the idea. And of course the teachers, you see that's the old grey men that are all sitting there. We also worked on another part of the project, which was on how can we make this history more interesting than just dates and facts. That was basically the idea. And we did more visiting, but never just visiting to visit. In the way we went to a workshop where they did 3D visualizations of spaces, and there we learned how we could use that in the future for documenting a space and making people more aware of space. We worked on texts, we looked in how people work in theaters. We went to see performances and discussed afterwards with the professionals on how they were influenced about history. And of course we went to all these nice historical places where you get a feel of what it is. So this is the second workshop, and then they made all these little cards with all their favorite subjects. But it also tells, it sounds like the traditional kind of, oh, let's know each other. The nice thing on this was that it really showed like, okay, I'm interested in history, but I'm really fascinated about this actress, or this technique, or this, and based on that we worked further. Because we had no plan in advance, we knew what we wanted to do, but we had no plan about the content. The content came from the students. What they said, okay, this is an interesting thing, and we worked further on that. And that's a nice part, because then you get also a lot of engagement. Now what we did in this project is basically we created a set of stories. The name canon comes from a kind of a standard agreed history that everybody should know. The 100 most important facts that you should know about this history. So we created 100 stories. We worked on teaching tools, in the sense practical things that you can use to teach in a fun way. We worked on teaching methodologies. Should we teach history in the right order, or should we more look into bring things together that influence each other? Or should we work on, if you talk about technology, can we trace technology back to a certain period? To give you one idea, is we're all now, it's very nice and hip and so on to have immersive spaces. That's a nice example. That's a very modern thing to do. It's really top of the technology, top of the bill. But in 1800s, there were like 100 of these immersive spaces touring around all over Europe. It was in another way, in the way they had kind of a circular place with a 360-degree painted set, where you would stand in the middle, and you wouldn't be able to see the underpart of, because you're on a platform, you can't see the underpart of the painting, and there is a little roof so you can't see the... So the idea is that you look around and you see the environment like it would be in reality. And they did all kind of things like the battles of Napoleon, and then they just painted the whole story of Napoleon till the end, and then you started back at the beginning. That's an immersive space. Streaming is a very modern thing. Well, they did that once the telephone was invented. Somebody said we put 2 telephone sets on the stage. And then at home you can have 2 listeners and you hear the performer sing. That's streaming. That's over 100 years ago. And often you see, that's so interesting I think in looking at the history, that you have this fantastic idea and it dies. And it dies because people are not ready for it. The audience is not ready for this concept. The technology is not ready for it. If you have a fixed painted immersive environment, after a while you get bored of it. There is other things in history that happen that make it impossible to make, but then people pick it up 100 years later. And they reinvent this concept, and they say it's very flashy and new. But in reality it isn't. And most of the technology you can even trace back to the Romans. If we talk about automation, and we're now all automating our stages and stuff like that, the Romans had, or the Greek had, a fully automated theater. So the concept was there. They were not ready to do that, but the concept was there. It was a scale model, and it opens, and you see the actors passing by, and you see the set changes, and nobody touches it. So the concept was there, but then it comes back from time to time in history. So you can trace most of these things back quite far in history, and one of the things is that it comes back because there is a need for it. We're not inventing stuff to invent stuff. Now we want to show something and it doesn't work, and then we come back at it 100 years later, and then we get better in it, and bit by bit we create further. So most of the things we know as modern and new inventions are in fact not new. Of course we also wanted to create a network, because we connect all these people together. You create contacts that will be long-lasting. I know my students that worked in this first project still are in contact with students from the different countries. And the nice thing is you go to another country and you can stay 3 days in somebody's home. It's a nice way of cheap traveling. But they're also sharing this interest in this topic. And if ever they need something, they know who to call in a different country. And the last part is a digital platform that we created to get all this information together. That was the last step. Good. The stories, 100 stories, and then you think, oh, it's a lot. The problem was we had too many stories. Because once you start brainstorming with people, you get a lot of things. So we had to get a little bit of structure in that. And the core thing was that this is really things you need to know. Now, if we talk about things, a story is not just one person, but it's a combination of 1 or 2 or 3 persons, a thing that happened that is really significant for the future, that relates to a real change in the way we work. And the limitation was a bit, you should be able to teach that in one small teaching unit, let's say an hour or something like that. That was a bit the idea. And of course we want to have a nice spread over time, and we want to have a nice spread over the different fields we were covering. So we ended up with kind of a matrix. Sometimes you need to structure things. Where on one hand we created 10 time frames, like the Middle Ages, Baroque, whatever, and that was already the first issue, because Baroque in theater is not necessarily the same moment as Baroque in painting, and Baroque in Sweden is not necessarily the same thing as Baroque in France or Baroque in Spain. So we had to define for ourselves, like, okay, this is what we call Baroque, and leave it open. Because that's the strange thing in a secondary school, they still think that most of this period starts on the 1st of January of a specific year. Then is the Baroque started at 1723 or something like that. Which is not a reality, because it's a movement. It's something that goes over from one thing in another, but it's not like this one thing stops at a certain point. So there, we had to learn how to deal with that, which makes it especially difficult because you want to put it in a database, and a database needs an exact date. So that's an interesting conflict to get. And on the other hand, we have all the different fields, including architecture, set design, lighting, technology, mechanics, general technical history, and then the general history also, and so on. So you get this matrix, and the nice thing is you get these 100 stories, and with the 10 time frames and the 10 disciplines, and now you can use these stories in different ways. You can say, I'm interested in a specific field like architecture, and then you can read through the whole history of architecture, and then you only need to read these 10 stories. Or you can say, I want to know everything about Baroque, and then you go in the other direction. Or you can, what we like to do is just wander around and pick some things that take your attention, where you think, oh, that's an interesting title. So it's possible to use it in different ways. A lot of discussion, a lot of brainstorming, and then at the end, well, somebody has to make the decision in, okay, these will be the 100 stories we have. So you're always disappointing people, but that's also a reality. And it ended up as a book. You can still order the book. It looks more or less like that. The idea was you have a 2-pager for each story. So, and it's short, but it will trigger you to go further and search further, but you get all the basics together in that. And it goes over all kind of different things. But often this is quite a nice example because it goes about the limelight, which is on one hand a technology, but on the other hand, it's the first time we had focused light. So we could put one actor in the spotlight, which was not possible before. That really changed our way of thinking in lighting, but it also changed our way of staging, because there was no need anymore to put all the important actors on the first row. You could put them in the back and put the spotlight. So that's one of these really changes that we have in history that is quite important, and so we found kind of 100 of them. The stories are printed. You can also download the whole book as a PDF, and it's also in a data version into the database. So this means that everybody that wants can use it. That's the whole idea behind it. I'll get you the PowerPoint and then you get all the links. Good. And this is an example of the digital version. So it tells you a story about temporary stages over the whole period of time. So also rock and roll, all that type of stuff. So it's quite fun. The second thing we make is teaching tools. And that's things that make it easier to teach, that give you the possibility to go deeper or to make things more explained, but that a single teacher would never be able to make, because it's just too much work for one lesson. A couple of examples. We made a 3D model of the Sabatini Theatre. I'm not sure if you know Sabatini. It's the first guy that made a manual for theatre technicians. And the first part explains how to build a theatre. Quite interesting, because the first thing he says is that if you want to build a theatre, go to the building that you will be using. So he expects already that there is a building, that is not like you create the whole theatre building, but you make the theatre inside of an existing building. And then he literally says, okay, you have to check the floors there, you have to put them in that angle, you do that like this. And bit by bit, if you follow the manual, you can build the theater. And that's exactly what the students did. So they followed the manual, and then they would kind of draw digitally, bit by bit, everything he said. Annotator is something completely different. That's a game. That's a game on for learning history, and it's kind of a fun game. And the third thing is a kind of a software where you can control an old light board and see what's happening and how it works. So complete different things, and there's a whole series of these tools that are. This is the theater. One of the surprises for us is because we think theater, so we think all the people are looking at the stage. But at the end, we figured out that you can see that here, that the audience was sitting in a U shape, in fact, looking at each other, and not, if you would look straight forward, not looking at the stage. And on the sideline, there is also this kind of funny stories, like you have this little platform in the middle there, and there the king is sitting, and around him are his knights, and then all the young women are sitting next to that, and then a row of old women, because they had to protect the young woman from all the audience that is sitting in the back. And then all the people on the side, well, yes, they will see into the wings, yes, they don't see the right perspective. Who cares? They're just plebs. They're just people that are not so important. So they wouldn't understand anyway. So it tells you something about the building, but at the same time it tells you something about how they treated the audience, how the social relationships were between. So it's always a lot more than, if you want to discover, than what it is. And then in the second book it also explains the different technologies. So bit by bit we also try to build in all these different technologies into this thing. And again, you can download the raw version of it and work further on it. Good. Annotator is basically a simple game where you have a lot of cards, where you have on one side a fact or a person or whatever that is important. It's partly based also on the 100 stories. And the idea is that you just say, okay, this is before that or this is after that. You create kind of a timeline. And until one of the participants says, you're lying. And then you turn them over, and on the back you see the exact dates and stuff like that. And it's, I must say, it's quite fun to do, and we put that sometimes just in the foyer where people were eating, and then spontaneously they started playing. You can print that out, you can put it in your school, and just play around with it. And of course it helps to have pizza and beer. That's a bit the reality, but the thing was all the pizzas were cold because the game was too fascinating. Okay. Another story is, this is a very old light board. It doesn't exist anymore, but we knew how it worked. So some people reconstructed that, so you can really do all the movements you could do on the board and see what the result would be. To understand that helps a lot, because otherwise you just look at something with a lot of buttons and you don't know what it really means. In the methodologies, that was mainly about how we teach, because we realized that between the teachers from all these different countries, we teach in a very different way. The way some people were literally standing at the stand reading a text of a course. And then I think, well, probably you could read that at home also. It would be way more interesting. I teach, for example, literally in the studio when we were working, and then we try stuff out and so on. That's the other extreme. And the rest was a bit in between. And in scenography also, different views. So we experimented with each other's methods, and based on that we tried to find new ideas to teach and to make this more alive. Otherwise it becomes extremely, I could read you for 6 hours dates from when theaters are built and burned down and so on. Pretty boring after a while. And what's more boring is one thing, but what do you learn from it? If you don't put the relationship, if you don't put them in. So we tried to figure out what type of things you could do, and that ended up in a cookbook. well, a cookbook is a bit the name. It's kind of different recipes to make your teaching more interesting. And it's inspirational. It's not like, okay, it's not like a real cookbook where you take this and you copy it exactly and it works. It's more like to inspire people to do new stuff. And it's, for example, this is a nice little example where you make a real salt water dimmer. It's basically put salt water in there, and then you lower a copper copper bar in there, and it works like a dimmer because the salt water is kind of a resistance. And you could do that, and we not only explained how to do that, but also how to do that safely, because there is some small risks involved in it. That's just one example. This is an example in exploring buildings and how buildings are organized, and how especially how theater buildings are organized based on little wooden blocks. And you can play around and try alternatives and so on. So that's kind of another way of, it's a way of really thinking about plans and stuff like that. This was a workshop on, we started with the Somi dialogues, and based on the Somi dialogues are in fact 4 dialogues between an expert and an audience member. So for example, there is the costume guy, and he talks to the audience member, and the audience member, why do you do this? And why do you do that? They talk about light, they talk about, and it's written in a dialogue, which is odd because it's not meant to play. In fact, it's a didactic way that you see back to Appia, for example. Appia has written some dialogues also to explain his ideas. And it helps that you have an audience member that doesn't understand the clue, so you need to explain it in simple ways. That's the whole idea of this dialogue. So they built the set, they worked on the dialogues, they played the dialogues, and they recorded them on video. And that gives you an idea of what this whole dialogue idea meant. And they also created set pieces based on Serlio. So on the writings of Serlio, he describes how you have to make a set. They made a set in real life, in a small space, in real life that you can play, and then you could look around and does this work? And how does this work now? Because it's this odd thing with this perspective. So that's another way. That's the video of the performance, and so they talk about lighting, but at the same time they show the lighting, so they have to figure out how it works. So that's a method also to learn about lighting while you're creating this performance. Good. The cookbook, you also can download it. It's also, it looks a bit similar layout-wise as the previous one. You have all these different elements, and it's also in the database. So you can have a printed version, a PDF version, or a digital version online. The nice thing on the digital version, it will also give you key information about, okay, how much time do you need? In the way you can say, I only want activities that take maximum 30 minutes. Or activities that I can do with only 3 students, or with a maximum of 20 students. So it kind of helps in creating some more of this stuff. And then the last part is the network. And the network is really, we gathered all the contacts we got. So we got to a city, we visited a lot of stuff, we met a lot of people. So we tried to bring them all together in kind of a large network. And that's a bit how we build on. And we want, because this Canon project is like 3 years in a very long period of time, because we already did this research on lighting and on mechanics before. Then it got into a project. Then we had a period where we just worked on our own again. And now we're back into this second project. So that's a bit the way it works. There's a long list of people that are all have an interest in one way or another in this history. And it goes from professional organizations over museums, over individual people, like the one guy, Marco, is a fantastic guy. He collects microphones, and he made a book about these microphones, and he links them to famous people. So like the microphone of Marilyn Monroe, and the microphone of, and because we have an understanding of these famous people in a time frame, you also start to understand what time frame the microphone was. And that's kind of an interesting combination. And there is microphones that are really almost connected to a person that used, well, Freddie Mercury used a specific type of microphone, and everybody will recognize that if they see this combination. There is other people that are really from museum part. It's like the museum in Amsterdam. But also voluntary projects like the Theater Encyclopedia, which was created when they shut down the theater museum in Amsterdam. All the friends of the museum got together and said, we have to continue something. And they created kind of a huge wiki page where they all continue adding information on. And now it's even hosted by the university collection, because they found it so important, they got so much information that the collection would never get, that bit by bit it becomes kind of, it's a voluntary thing, but it's kind of embraced by the professional collection. There's people that are just collecting things. One quite extreme example is the Technische Kabinett of the Opera of Leipzig. And that's kind of a fun story. It's you go in the cellars of the opera, and there is a huge collection of equipment. It was never meant to be there. It just happened. Because what happened is that they used this one classroom, and they have this apprenticeship idea where you're not learning in a school, but you're learning directly on the work floor the whole time. And at one point, one of the teachers, they have this classroom in the cellar for their own apprentices, and from some other theaters also together. And at one point the guy said, oh, I have this old spotlight. Figure out how it works as an exercise for the students. The result was that the next week every student brought in other old equipment, like, oh, I found this in my workplace, and so on. And it became, bit by bit, it became a collection, which has the oldest spotlights that are from before 1900, from Hugo Barr, for example. Was already kind of a big collection. They make everything work because they have a large technical staff. In their free time they will repair things and make them. They have a working cloud projector, from 360-degree cloud projector, for example. They have line lights, they have arc lights. And then at one point, when the changeover in Germany was there, and East and Western Germany got together, they suddenly got all the equipment from all the former Soviet theaters. So they have theaters where you program them with punch cards, with a card where you put holes in it, and then you put that in the lighting computer. They have every type of dimmer that has ever existed. So it's a huge collection, and basically it's the technicians that are pensioned that are kind of taking care of this. And it grows and it grows and it grows, which is a rather exciting little thing. There is other crazy guys, like there is an English guy, Chris Hicks. He collects PA systems, so full PA systems. Like he has the PA of the backside of the moon tour. He has the original PA, because he tries to trace back the original equipment. And sometimes there's one part in New York and another part ends up somewhere in Africa. And he gathers all that together and he tries to rebuild this PA. He has the original PA of the rooftop concert of the Beatles. And well, PAs are big, in the way every PA is more or less a truck. And I think he has like 50 PAs. But yeah,
What's PA?
it's a sound system for concerts.
Okay.
Yeah. Sorry for my. So he collects that. So you have all these people collecting stuff, which is on one hand extremely interesting. On the other hand, the big issue is at one point they will die. And nobody knows what will happen with these collections. There is one guy, Per Edström from Sweden. He's kind of a very 60s director in that time. And in that time, one of the things you could do if you're a very progressive theater, you would go to the people with your theater. You didn't expect people to come to your theater. But for example, in Belgium, we had a company, they had a tent, and they went to play in places where nobody else would ever come. They also played, when there was a strike, they would play a performance in front of the factory that they blocked, things like that. He did a similar thing, but in Sweden you do that by boat, because you have all these little islands. So what he did is he built a theater on a boat that could seat like 180 people, and he toured around. And he documented all the theaters in Sweden and all the equipment there. So after a while he got this huge collection of equipment. He's on a farm where there is a dock where this boat is, which is a full functioning theater, which is unfortunately now sunk, and we saved all the equipment on it, but we couldn't save the boat because that was too much money. There is a second theater there, which is a big barn, which has equipment from before the 1900s even, and from all theaters over Sweden. There is an open air theater there on the farm, and there is an experimental theater there where you can work with gas light, with electrical light, with candle light, with limelight, with arc light, and with early electrical light. So the whole thing, and you literally can put an actor on stage and then change from electrical to gas light in one move. That's all there, and then he has a huge library, which is in kind of an odd place where he does his research, which is in a cellar, and there is a river going through the cellar. Because there was a river when they built the building, so they left the small river, which is going to his archive, where there is books of 1800, 1750, and so on. The guy is now 95, and his daughters are slightly panicking, like, what the hell are we gonna do with this? The museum came to have a look, and they got very scared. So we're now, in the first place, documenting what he's doing and what there is, in the hope that we can save it in one way or another, because otherwise it will probably be lost. And then I'm not even talking about the side things he had, because there is also a truck with, you know, we have these freak shows where you have all these things in, weird things in glass bottles and wax figures and so on. There is a truck with a full freak show from 1890 there, and nobody knows what to do with it. So we're trying to save this, and we're trying to do that in bringing together people from all over Europe to see, okay, can we do something in common that makes it happen, that we save at least part of it. So there is all kind of this different people. At the same time, there are, like, the European Employers Organization is in there, the theaters, formal museums, and so on. But by bringing them together, you get a new dynamic on this topic. So this network is important, but it's very invisible in the way we all know each other. But it's not like something that you put in a box and you say, okay, this is the result. Networks are living things. And then the last part of the Canon project is the database. And the whole idea is we gather so much information, and how do we structure that? And how do we structure that in a way that it's usable for everyone, that it's findable for everyone, and that we can also visualize things. I can give you 100 dates, it doesn't say anything. Or I can tell you about 50 theaters if you don't know where they are or how they look like. It's very hard. So we try to visualize information and relations between things and so on. The idea was to create a platform that is also collaborative, where a lot of people from different countries can work together on this thing. and that works for spreading the information, and that works for safeguarding the information. Because one thing is objects that people have in their collections, another thing is a lot of people have paperwork, have large archives. What do we do with them? And there one of the issues is often then they give their documentation to a collection, and then it gets in kind of a huge box that says collection of this person. And you don't know what's in there, what it means. You're not allowed to access it because you can only have one document, but they don't know what the documents are that are in there. So that is rather problematic, and we try to make that all in one place. At least you know where it is, or what it means, or what is in there. For example, magazines is every technician's organization has a magazine, but we try to bring them all together so that if you search something, that you find it also in these different magazines. That was a bit the idea behind that. The idea of the timeline started in the year 2000, when I was on holiday with my family, and I bought that, which is kind of a fun thing. It's a history meter. So if you look well, you will see that every centimeter is a fact. And the year 2000, 2 meters, so you had every 10 years a fact. Which I thought, well, that's a fun game, and then I started thinking, like, but in fact it's a fantastic idea that we bring all these things together in kind of a timeline. And that, a bit later, I created an exhibition for another education program that existed at that time, 25 years or something like that. So we made an exhibition where we put the timeline on the wall, and we kind of organized all the equipment from time to time. And every 10 years there was kind of a stop, and there you had kind of a recreation of a booth, a technical booth. So we had, for example, the first PA systems for a setup for a festival. So a soundboard, a light board, follow spot on a little scaffolding, and then you saw a video of festival. So that was kind of to make people, otherwise it becomes, all this equipment becomes pretty boring, because for most people it's black boxes with a hook. That's mainly what we use. So when then we had the cultural centers from the 70s. We had a rehearsal space, you know, these spaces in the cellar with overfull ashtrays and no tables but beer boxes instead to put their stuff on, where musicians rehearsed. We had one built like that. We had a studio from a certain period of time. We had a booth from a typical school theater with the equipment they had there. So you could go through this timeline and on one hand discover the technology, but also the way people worked. That was a bit the idea. So this timeline idea started to take shape, got at one point to kind of more first paper version. That was the one you saw earlier on the wall. That was the first version of this. This one. Then we got to this version, and bit by bit. The problem was that at one point there is so much information that you don't see anything. Because the idea was you have the timeline, and then every grey or white line is a different field, and you can put all the but after a while there is so much information that you don't see anything in. So a nice idea. We still use this when we do workshops on a topic, because there you can literally say, okay, this happened in this city, and then you start puzzling everything together. This person worked there, so you can put them there, and you can write on them, and you can make notes and little drawings on them. It helps a lot in the thinking process, but the idea of putting the whole history of the world in one timeline was, well, a nice idea, but it didn't work. We repeated that in bits and parts in different countries. We went to Stockholm and to Gothenburg to work with students, where we often worked on their local history, in a way where we looked at, okay, what happened in Stockholm? What are all the theaters here? And by organizing it in that way, it helped a lot in understanding, like, oh yes, but in that period all the theaters disappeared. That was because the king was shot in a theater, so it was not a safe place anymore. And then this happened, and then there is this French company coming in and make stuff, and you start to relate all these things, and you start to see where there's a lot of things happening and where there's hardly anything happening. And sometimes you get also odd things. At one point I was working on the theater fires, but all the software we're using is quite experimental. So at one point I see like 35 theaters that burned down the same day. So I think we must have kind of a software error. So I start looking into what is the problem, and I couldn't find the problem until it was all theaters in Dresden. And then I realized that was the day that the whole city of Dresden was bombed, which basically meant that all the theaters were destroyed at that point. So it also helps you to see like odd things in history and then try to figure out what really happened. So that's a bit the way we work. The core thing in trying to gather all this is because most collections, most information is in danger at the moment. Physical collections are in danger because, as I told, collectors get old, their family doesn't know what to do with it. Museums are not very happy in taking that in, because, to give you an idea, my own collection is about 140 pallets. That is in trucks, that is like 3 of the longest trucks you can have. And I'm even not accepting everything. So that's a huge amount for a museum that is panic, because they don't know what to do with it, they don't know how to store it, they don't know how to document it, they don't have the expertise. So that's a bit of an issue. So at one point I will be owner of a collection in danger, because my kids they think, can we please get rid of this thing before you die? Also a reality, which I'm trying. On the other hand, often museums have strict rules and are not adapted to what we do. They have not enough means, so it also means if they take something in, they don't have the time to document it, and they don't have the expertise. One of the things we try to do now is to document stuff in advance, so it's kind of ready for intake in a museum. That helps a lot. And the relation with museum gets better, because in the beginning they were thinking like, who are these odd things that come us to tell how we have to work? Well, now we start to, because they start to realize we have stuff in our collection that we don't know what it is, we help them, and we hope them to get enough movement to help us later. So we think, okay, that's one thing with all the physical collections. It's even worse with things that we call collections but that are not really collections. Like every theater has at least one of these little rooms somewhere in the cellar or in the attic where they keep their own stuff. They're all stuff they don't want to throw away. And on a regular basis I get a phone call from people saying, you know, next week they start to rebuild our theater. We figured out there is this one room with all this old equipment. If you pick it up this week, you can have it. Otherwise, we have to throw it away. So my collection is also a bit an orphanage, in the sense it's when people have to get rid of it. I prefer that they keep it in situ, because that makes way more sense. But if they can't, I have a place to keep it. That's a bit the idea. With paperwork that people often keep in their own house, like designs of a designer, technical documentation from a designer or from a technician, old books and that type of stuff. Often when they died, the family thinks this is a lot of old paper, and it all goes to the bin. So we try to make people aware that there could be value in these things, and we try to help people also to get to limit a bit this risk that we're going to have gaps into the history. Now we think that, oh, but at the moment everything is documented online. You can find everything online. And once something is online, it will never disappear. That's what we say. I have to disappoint you. The things that never disappear on the internet are the only things that we would like to disappear. The things that are a bit awkward about you, about whatever, that's the things you want to get rid of. But the real valuable stuff is the things that are disappearing. I had a designer that died 2 years ago. Last year his website disappeared with all the information on it. Because, well, nobody paid the server anymore. So the websites disappear, and what's even worse is that more and more we have dynamic websites. We're looking at websites that don't really exist. A dynamic website is a website that adapts itself to who is looking. So when I will be looking at a website, it probably will show it in English. Because my browser is set in English. While if you would look, it would look in Italian. But it's not necessarily giving you the same information. If I look at the theater today, I will see the program for the next 6 months. If I look at the same website tomorrow, I don't see what happened yesterday, because that disappeared. Because that's the dynamics of it will give you different information if you look at it from another country than if you are a local. Because then they expect you to be a tourist, and they give you other information. So the problem is these websites don't really exist. The data behind it often exists, but it's not like you can kind of copy the website and then keep this information. So that is really a big issue, which is getting worse and worse, because more and more there is more functionality in that type of websites, which makes it harder to keep it. Which also means that not only the information about the production disappears, but also about the people that work for it. So once you're working in theater, you're losing permanently part of your history, because it is not grabbed in a way that we can reuse. We see full archives disappearing. It's in the States at the moment. It is extreme in the sense they just decide the archive takes place. There's only 7 people a year using it. We're going to get rid of it, and they just throw complete archives away. They close complete libraries because they're not efficient. Which means we lose a lot of information, because in the past, university libraries were very good because they kept all their old learning equipment, they kept all their theses that give you a point of view from that moment in time. Somebody writes in the 60s a thesis about the early electric lighting. It will give you a complete different vision than my vision now. Because they're just ending this period and it's still kind of there, while I'm really looking from a distance to that. If you throw all that away, we're really losing. And my worry is that we will know in the long run, we will know more about the Roman times than about the last 50 years. Because there is digital information is, on one thing it's disappearing, like I said, and on top of that, it is also disintegrating. I can't open my first design files anymore because they were made with the software that was then top of the bill, but that disappeared afterwards. And there is no other software to read it. Often documents are stored in an odd format, and especially if you have specialized software, it's all stored in file types that don't exist anymore. So we're really going to have a big issue documenting the history of the last 40, 50 years. On top of that, we create so much stuff in the way, if you were in the Renaissance and you wrote the book, you wrote one version and you thought 7 times before you wrote the sentence, because it was a very expensive sentence in a book like that. And now we produce hundreds of documents a day, but we never take the time to say, okay, this is important, this is not important, and to keep it. So the amount of information we get is huge, but to find the right information becomes more and more difficult. I don't want to depress you. You just have to solve this problem. So that's a bit one of the things that motivated us. And so we created this kind of Canon base. And Canon base is an open source platform where you can work together with different people, which visualizes information, and it's open data and open source. So everything that is there you can use, but on top of that, you can use also the whole data set and do something new with it. So you're not only having access to the information that is in the front, but you can literally read all the information. We get to that tomorrow in detail, how that all can work. But it means that we really, everything we know, we share with other people. The most difficult part is that we have to get everything we know into the database. That's a bit the difficult part. Good. To give you one example about this is the PQ in Prague. I'm not sure if you know the PQ. It's the quadrennial of scenography. It's the world exhibition of scenography, of costume, everything which is visual in theater. Lighting design, sound design, and so on. It's a huge exhibition in the way it's often with schools from 60, 70, 80 countries sometimes. They all come together, they all show their work, but it's also interactive in the sense that some of them decide to make work there locally. Some bring what used to be a series, Design as Performance, for example, where they made a performance, but where the core player was the design. And then they could show that to each other. There is workshops with the students, there is all kind of events. It's a fantastic thing to do, but how the hell do you document something like that? So if you put the PQ in the core, all these countries put some articles about that in their magazines. So that gives you a huge amount of information. We know who the people were that were coming. We also know what prizes they won there, for example. We know what the organizations were that sent these people to them. On top of that, there is a mass amount of pictures. There is a lot of people telling stories, but more and more also having blogs and that type of stuff, or video reports and so on. There is the official part that goes into the archives, and not only the archive of PQ, but every organization has its own archive. So, and of course after a while there's also books written about what happened there, for example. So you get a lot of information, and the core thing is how do you structure that it's useful. Because now we're looking at the PQ as a core. And then it makes sense that are all the sources. But at one point, you want to look at one of the organizations, and their PQ will be just a part of what they are doing. Or you want to look at one designer, and part of his work is shown in PQ, but part of his work is shown in different theaters in different places. So, by creating a structure where, depending on the place where you look, you get kind of other information, and where you bring together all this information, because you have to imagine that these magazines are in different archives in different countries. These pictures are all over the place, because some in private, some are collected, some are online, some are offline, whatever. These stories often disappear, so you have to find a way to keep them. These archives often just have a box PQ, but not what's in there in detail, and that doesn't help to say, okay, if you need this, you have to look there. These books sometimes go about PQ, but sometimes they also have just like 1/2 page about this designer or this organization. So the whole trick was to figure out a structure that wherever you looked, you would always get the environment of the subject. And that was the core thing, and we literally did that research by doing, in the sense that we started experimenting, and we failed a lot of times, where we said, okay, we wipe everything and we start all over again, which is a bit frustrating, but it helps. And you test things, and then you test it in a larger group, and then you think, oh, this is working, and then suddenly you see that there is an error, and it's a bit like when you do bookkeeping. You think, oh, there is 0.2 cents that is wrong. And then you can think, yeah, what is 0.2%? 2 cents. That's nothing in the whole amount. But often the 0.2% points you to an error that could be also way larger in the future. So by testing the structure and finding errors, we always could go back and see is the whole structure, is that same, and is that healthy, and does it do what it's supposed to do? And you adopt and you adapt, and you look often to details, but you always have to keep a bird's eye, like, are we still doing what we want to do? So that was kind of a rather experimental way of working, where we used the solution, but we're going to go deeper in that tomorrow, which is Wikidata software. You probably all know Wikipedia. The disadvantage of Wikipedia is monolingual. It gives you only information in one language, and often one language for one country. So in a world where we work together with people from all over the world, that is a bit annoying, because then you get all kind of conflicts. And what you will see if you look at Wikipedia and you look down the same page in another language, that often there is other information that is not necessarily synchronized. Wikidata is it's the same concept in the sense it's open source, everybody can work on it, everybody can share information, but it is multilingual, it's based on concepts. So it doesn't matter if you look in French or German or Italian or Spanish or whatever, you should get to the same points. Open link data, that's what we're going to talk about tomorrow. And it's a very boring software, because it just gives you a list of information. Very boring. So what we did is we made a layer on top of it. So you have the data layer, and we made something nicer on top of it to be able to read it. And we combined it with wiki pages, with Wikipedia pages. So what we do is you have the data, and at one point you think, I want to write a story about this. And then you link a wiki page to this data, which means that then in that language you have the story which is behind the data, in fact. But we'll show that tomorrow. That's what we started with in this project, and that evolved bit by bit into a rather complex thing, but that exactly does what we do. And now in the second project, we have to redo all the work because we extended it, for example, to design. So we have to reinvent, or we have to invent extra functionalities, we have to invent extra links to things, but we also sometimes have to go back and adapt what we did before, because it did work for what we were doing at that point, but we have to adapt it now for all the extras. But I would propose that we talk about that tomorrow, because I guess you're very tired of me talking. So, see you tomorrow.